Charlotte's back, Amber's back. I feel like it's old home week. Like a family reunion, huh? Well, I had an interesting week too. Many of you know I went to a leadership summit at Desert Hills Lutheran Church. And they had one speaker after another for 2 days straight. It was all televised. So they had some really big name speakers. And it was good. It was good. I got a lot out of it. There were some speakers I liked better than others, as always. The ones that I was a little uncomfortable with, most of them were the ministers. There's a certain style of preaching. Some of you may know it. And that's a style that if you want to get people motivated, you have to really talk loud and shout at them and, get people really riled up. And I just can't handle that, yelling at me, shouting at me. So when those kinds of speakers, whether they were the motivational speakers or the ministers, I would step out into the prayer room for a while until the yelling stopped, and then I would come back in. But, to me, it's all about being authentic. I think it's more important to everybody, just be authentic. I love the story of Martin Luther King. Now, nobody could preach like he could, right? But did you know that the first church he ever applied for, they turned him down and said he wasn't ready because he didn't have that preaching style. He had to develop that. And I'm sure that church is very embarrassed by now that they didn't hire him. The speaker I liked best, there were people that were really authentic, like Melinda Gates, Bill Gates' wife. And the leader of the Ford Motor Company, he used to be the head of Boeing, and now he's the head of Ford. And he had such a gentle style. I really liked what he had to say. Made me want to go out and get a Ford, but I don't want to give up my Honda yet. My point is, again, that I believe very often in being authentic. I've shared with you many times that I don't like being at parties where people ask you what you do for a living, because I go, I got to tell them I'm a minister. Because as soon as you say you're a minister, everybody gets very polite. And the whole party is sort of stilted from there on out. And that's when I want to scream and say being spiritual does not mean being polite or nicey nice or goody two-shoes. Being spiritual means being your authentic self, whatever that is. And for each one here, that is something different than being polite. Now, I love stories of authentic people doing their own thing. And my favorite one I heard last week, I get Oprah magazine. And there's a new columnist who's Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, and Love. All the women know who that is, right? And she wrote about a Russian lady, an older Russian lady, and I have to read her last name, Hannah Zavorokna, something like that, from Chernobyl, believe it or not. She lives in Chernobyl. Now, that's where they had the big nuclear meltdown. And afterwards, they moved everybody out of the town. It wasn't safe to live there. It was very toxic. So they moved everybody out of their homes, and some people didn't have anywhere else to go, so they gave them government housing. But some of these people, that was their home. They lived there all their lives. And good old Hannah and a few of her friends, mostly women and mostly older, they moved back to Chernobyl and lived there and thrived. They thrived more than some of the people that stayed in the government housing, where it was safe. Now, isn't that interesting? How could they survive there? And Elizabeth Gilbert, she has her own way of talking. She said, it's some of the most dangerous land on earth. But to a lady like Hannah, who's already been through so many trials, famine, World War II, an atomic meltdown, aging itself, we all know what that's like. What does safe mean anyway? So Hannah drinks the contaminated water, plants vegetable gardens in the poisoned soil, makes her own moonshine, now that's probably why, laughs about life, and then goes out to butcher another radioactive pig to make radioactive sausage. I love that part. She's joined by her friends who live and laugh and butcher their own irradiated pigs. Don't you love that? And they're all living, their neighbors that moved to safe government housing. Now, why is that? Because they're happy. That's where they want to be, in their home. They're being and living their authentic lives. Now please, I'm not recommending that you all go move to radioactive property. That's not what the point is. But we have to be the love that we think we are until we awaken to who we really are. And if you think of the previous generations, I know my parents' generations, they never left, where they grew up. They probably had the same jobs as their parents, lived in the same place, kept the same marriage, the same religion, the same career all their lives. But this generation, and even our generation, we wanted to have meaning. Our life had to feel like it had purpose. And we move so often, I don't know about you, but my address book is always in pencil. Because for the longest time I had it in ink and I was constantly crossing off people's addresses, especially my own. So now my address book is always in pencil. There's so many choices. And of course, along with that, there's a pressure. Am I doing enough? After watching, the leadership summit, after watching all these people, and they were so inspiring, and you can do it, and all these people that had these big, huge ministries, and I got to feeling a little inadequate, like, gee, am I doing enough? God saved me with his healing miracle, and I'm always in small churches. I feel more comfortable there, I started to feel inadequate. Even in unity, we tell you that you can be the Christ. Talk about pressure. I hope you don't feel that pressure. Aging itself can become a fear. Have I done enough with my life? My own mother went through that, and she was a very positive woman. But there was one day, during her final year, where when I talked to her, I was so surprised because she was, I knew she was approaching her transition, and all those old religious ideas came back to haunt her. That she wasn't always good enough. She didn't follow all the church rules. Did she do enough? She was a little afraid of judgment, of not measuring up. How sad. There was an old song from the 70s play, some of you may know it, by Studs Terkel. What a name, huh? The song went, if I could have been what I could have been, I really would have been something. If I could have been what I would have been, I really could have been something. Wow, that would give you a spiritual hernia by, trying so hard to live up to that. I feel uncomfortable with that. I much prefer Greg Levoy in his book Callings. He said, you just need to figure out what decisions to assure that when your life flashes before your eyes, it holds your interest. Your interest, not anybody else's interest. But your interest, not to be like everybody else. I like to compare Beethoven to Mozart. Equally wonderful, right? But if you compare their lives, Beethoven was a perfectionist. He wrote and rewrote and changed every bar again and again, sometimes a dozen times, before he felt like he finally got it right. Where Mozart was this free spirit, total nonconformist, broke every rule, and he would just joyously take off. I think that's why we feel his music so much. We feel the freedom in it. And there's a healing quality to his music. There's all these CDs that came out about, helping your mind by listening to Mozart. That healing quality is because he was free. He wasn't trying to be perfect or to do it right. Jesus was that same nonconformist. He rebelled against the status quo. The scribes and the Pharisees were all saying, you have to do the letter of the law. And Jesus said, no, it's the spirit of the law. The law is here for us. We're not here for the law. And he never would have said, ask yourself, what would Jesus do? He never would have said that. I'm sorry. He would have said, ask yourself what you would do. Your authentic self. We don't need another of the same person, as wonderful he was. We each need to be who we are. There was a Hasidic rabbi by the name of Zusya. All these Russian names I'm having to pronounce today. Zusya. And when he came to the throne of God, he was concerned Not that God would ask him why he was more like Moses or Abraham or Jesus, but rather why he had not been more like Zuzia. Why haven't you been more like your authentic self? That's why I created you. And that doesn't mean we should be loose cannons. I know when Coyote was living with us, I used to say, yes, you have to be who you are, but in harmony with each other, in harmony with the world. So there's that balance we have to keep with each other. In the 60s, we all tried to find ourselves. Remember that? I have to find myself. Usually it was by going to California. But then we realized as the decades went on that it wasn't about finding yourself. It was by choosing to be who your authentic self was, whatever you decided that was. And that took some introspection, didn't it? Know thyself. We really had to get to know ourselves. And that takes courage. Mark Gerzon in the book Coming Into Your Own said, if it feels safe, it's probably not your right path. If you're scared out of your mind, it probably is. Because it's taking you into more of who you are. And that can take risk. You can be ridiculed, you can be judged. And you have to be willing to make mistakes. Like Mozart, being free to be wild and make your own mistakes. Last week we talked about the different ways God speaks to us. And one time I actually heard another audible voice. Every once in a while I would hear a voice. And it said, leave safety in my arms and go out and dance the dance of creativity. But first you have to leave safety behind to really be free and dance that dance. And that means allowing yourself to be yourself. There was a woman from Minnesota, my home, by the name of Anna Linnea. And she was the first woman to kayak around Lake Superior. Now that doesn't sound too hard, but you have to know Lake Superior for those of you who have been there. It is big and it is dangerous. It is not a friendly lake, and a storm can come up at the moment's notice. Ships have sunk, and here she was going to kayak all the way around it. She had that prompting to do that. Now her family and friends, you can imagine, thought she was crazy, blasted her. Greg Levoy in the book Callings said, she said, there weren't many people who said, oh, that's really a great idea. She said, in fact, there were none. It was very tough being on the receiving end of not only my own doubts, but everyone else's. It's really hard to stand in your own truth when everybody around you is telling you, why don't you just keep things the way they are? Or in my case, what are you, crazy? When in judgment of another, repeat with me, they are just being the love they think they are until they awaken to who they really are. Together, they are just being the love they think they are until they awaken to who they really are. Let's do that one more time. They're just being the love they think they are until they awaken to who they really are. And every one of us has to do that in our own way. Once a year I dig out a DVD I have called One Man's Way. It's the story of Norman Vincent Peale. Any fans of Norman Vincent Peale here? It's an old black and white movie. Maybe I'll show it here sometime if there's enough people. Would you all like to see it? It's a really, really good movie. I'll dig it out and we'll set a date for it. I'll tell you next week. But without giving the whole thing away, when he wrote the book, The Power of Positive Thinking, that book really took off, remember? Except for his peers, the people in his church, and not his church so much, but the higher ups and all his peers. They told him it was blasphemous. They told him it was of the devil. They told him he should either quit doing that or leave the church. And he really considered giving up ministry. He considered giving up writing. But he prayed to God for a sign. And as long as we're going to see the movie, I won't tell you how it ended. But there was a definite, miraculous sign that he received, that he was doing the right thing. One man's way. Thank God he listened to God and lived his own authentic life instead of listening to the people around him. Of course, the hero we usually think of is Henry David Thoreau. If a man does not keep pace with his companions, Perhaps it's because he hears a different drummer. My drummer is Michael, I always say. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. But I never do drumming circles. You know why? I love drumming circles. Anybody wants to do one here, go ahead. But the reason why it doesn't work for me, I always seem to be drumming in a different beat or rhythm than everybody else. I went to one once and I was so excited and I was drumming away and I noticed everybody else was drumming different for me. I thought, well, this isn't for me. I have to do my drumming alone, I guess. Sometimes we don't understand our lives. I mean, does anybody here have a life that makes sense? Mine doesn't make sense yet. I never have figured it out. But I know someday, we just have to trust. Someday it will all make sense. The soul's journey is just about being the love you think you are until you awaken to who you really are. And enlightenment is not the end of the journey, believe it or not. Enlightenment is not the end. For then we begin a life of service. Not in a drudgery, oh, now I have to serve, but a joyous pleasure of being the love you are by giving yourself to the world around you joyously. You all know the author John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Everybody has read that, I'm sure. He tells his story. He said, I was a celibate monk for 9 years. Bless his heart. He said, for 12 to 18 hours a day, I focused on my spiritual discipline. Hatha yoga, body purifications, breathing exercises, meditation. And at a certain point, he said, I had my peak spiritual experience. For me, it was angels singing for weeks. Wouldn't that be wonderful to hear that? And he said, I could have just left my body and gone to heaven. But my brother was manic depressive and was having another episode. And I had a choice. I could keep meditating or I could help my brother. And that's when I started coming into the world to study psychology. Spirituality is living in harmony with others. There's that living in harmony with others, in partnership with others on the planet. We find God within us, then we find God through serving others, through being in the world. There are many ways to get to that place. It's not only the priests who are connected to God. We are all connected to God. And it's not about sitting on a mountaintop going, oh, you can't even do that on key. It's not about that. It's about being your authentic self in service to the world. The parable of the talents is all about that, being who you are in service to others joyously, joyously. Well, let us take that into prayer. God, we choose to be our authentic self, and we ask your Holy Spirit within us to give us those inner promptings, those nudges, what to say and be in every situation, where to go and what to do, and how to just be present right now with each other, in harmony with each other, with grace and with ease and with pure joy. We enter into the knowingness of who we are as spiritual beings, dancing freely, freely with each other, with love and with peace and with harmony. And we say thank you, Father, Mother God, in the nature of the Christ. And so it is. Amen.